Hello and welcome to AI Ramblings, episode 15 already. Neal, what do you think?
It's going well. It flew by. I feel like we were just starting off a couple weeks ago.
Nothing happened this week, Neal. OpenAI, finally, months of waiting. We now have GPT-5 and ChatGPT built on that. A lot to talk about there. And they also released their long-awaited open weights, which is a lighter version of open source models, which is the big thing. And then the other major big news of the week was just earnings season for the big tech went through, and Wall Street generally loves everything, even though these companies are spending extraordinary, unprecedented, I'm running out of words, amounts of money, several $100 billion collectively a year. And it's going to go on for at least 3, 4, 5 years, the way it's looking. All of that has big questions on the business models of these companies, etc. There's a lot to talk about there. And then, so a lot of it, just out there is enough on the news. And then we have, I think, a very good major topic of the week as well to discuss. So let's get into it. So I don't know if you've had a chance to play with GPT-5 or even the open source models, but what do you think?
I watched the full demo. They did a couple side demos, of course, with some of the guys at Cursor and whatnot. And I think there's a lot of cool applications to this. Obviously, a lot of this was reported on before, that they would be switching to a unified and simplified interface where there's less of choosing what model you use and more just asking a question and getting the best answer possible. I think from a UI UX perspective, which is kind of the area that I'm looking at it from a product point of view, I think the over simplification that they've done can benefit mainstream users mostly, but I think it will end up frustrating the developers and potentially more of the business users who prefer a bit more control over the model selection and the cost, obviously, that's embedded with a lot of these models. It's something that we talked about last week. Sorry, yeah, you have thoughts?
I just wanted to add to that business frustration. Yes, that was expressed in some of the early reactions, but it very clearly was clarified that businesses still have access to all the granularity of the models, because GPT-5 is just a collection of the models. They build a routing system for mainstream users. Remember, this is a company that didn't have this product. This is their third year post ChatGPT, and this is the fastest ramp in history to mainstream audiences. So they've gone from 100 million to the 300 million users a week that they've declared and talked about. Now it's 700 million. So all of these changes that we're talking about, the simplification and the unification, is really for my sister, your mom, mainstream people who couldn't give a hoot about that. Businesses, it's just to clarify, because I this was a big issue, because I did a lot of work on the business model implications of all of this, etc., and some of the analytics. And by the way, all of the stuff we're talking about is in detailed posts. It'll be in the show notes. A lot of links that you guys can go look at, read at. A lot of links to other sources. These are the best things we've found. So please, if you're interested, go down those rabbit holes with us. In the context of this, I just wanted to. The only reason I wanted to jump in here is that businesses still have access to all the granular models, especially in the pro versions, the enterprise versions, etc. They can choose that, is my understanding. And certainly they can do that through the APIs. So we should always keep in mind, especially for OpenAI, because this was a company that was literally started to focus on the enterprise market. And by coincidence, they ended up becoming the biggest consumer product since Google, basically, on the planet. And that's what they're running on. And that's their opportunity and challenge.
Yes.
Anthropic, on the other hand, it'll be interesting because they are much more enterprise focused. Their Claude models are going head to head, toe to toe, whatever appendage you want to talk about, against GPT-5. And it'll be interesting how they evolve their UI UX from a product. So as it comes out, we should talk about it in future shows. Please continue.
Exactly. Yeah. So that what you kind of highlighted just serves to back up the point I'm trying to make, where a lot of these things are going to have to be rethought based on what users are actually playing around with it. Whereas, as you said, a lot of the mainstream users usually don't care what models they are using; they just want the best answer, the fastest. Whereas developers and businesses want a lot more control over the granularity and obviously the compute that they're using, which is why these things have kind of been redesigned for them versus a lot of the mainstream.
I wanted to add one more UI UX. It's really interesting because what Sam Altman said, hey, you don't have to pick from a list anymore. Every interview is done since GPT-5 launch. And the reality is, or the reviewers are already finding out that for most of the things that they're using ChatGPT for, it's the heavy quote reasoning, thinking type of stuff. And so the workaround they found using ChatGPT in the prompt use the word think. So instead of the pick reasoning, is the use of think. So all of a sudden we've changed the UI. Is a subtle point here. And that's coming clearly through a lot of the reviews on YouTube on people playing around with this in terms of all kinds of projects and so on. So just telling it to think, telling it to think more, that's how you're kind of accessing those particular deep reasoning models, which by the way have economic ramifications, because more mainstream users figure that out and do that. That means the cost assumptions for OpenAI on how much it's going to cost to deliver these services, or whatever the pricing is on the tier, because GPT-5 is available in the free tiers, but only a certain number of limited queries, and then you have to pay more to get more. And so all of this is just exciting to be worked out, but there are a lot of ongoing questions, and every one of these companies is going to figure out how to redesign and reiterate on the product side, the UI UX side, and this is going to be a fascinating exercise. So it's all very exciting, and I just wanted to underline that point.
Yeah, no, I think even what you just highlighted there, that people are having to find ways to kind of hack these UIs to kind of get what they want out of it, just proves the point that in the end of the day, a lot of these UI and product decisions end up coming to how users are finding new ways that the developers themselves probably didn't even think to add. So it's great.
The other big piece of news, because GPT-5 from OpenAI was on Thursday, but Tuesday they released their long-awaited open source version of their earlier GPT models, and it's open source in quotation marks, because there's open weights. Technically, it's basically they you have the weights, but you don't have the details on the training data, which is very geeky. It's not a big deal, because even Llama, which is the big open source model from Meta, is the same kind of thing. The one thing that the geeks really liked about OpenAI's approach was they put it out under the Apache 2 licensing model, which allows a lot more flexibility for developers and businesses to do very interesting things for it. I think it was done in the best way OpenAI could have done it, meaning they needed to thread the needle, keep all the core advantages of their broader product set, because they have to generate the revenues to pay for the costs. And right now, their costs are far bigger, even though the revenue numbers are eye-popping for OpenAI as a company of over $1 billion of revenue a month. Everyone's like, oh my God, that's amazing. Maybe it's worth 300 billion, or, the next valuation they've talked about is 500 billion. They're going to be selling some secondary stock to, clamoring investors around the world. And so they're making billions in revenues, unprecedented for a quote startup, that's now on its way to being over 10 years old. As we've talked about, on the inference side, as millions and billions of users come on, the cost of delivering the service is variable. So you need more compute. You got to pay for the compute. The compute costs run way ahead of the revenues, which mean you're having billions in losses that you have to fund. And that's the dynamic on the business side. I had a couple of posts, one talking about that part of the whole thing, which details the business challenges of this. But from a product point of view, which is what we're talking about, this is the open source thing is a huge opportunity for OpenAI to go head on, number one, against Meta, which is also ramping up their big efforts in AI. And then more importantly, competition from AI companies out of China, DeepSeek, Alibaba, etc. They've switched literally in 150 days from more proprietary models to 9 out of 10 models in China now are open source, because they've realized that that's a big competitive advantage globally for them. Open source AI is the biggest competitor now is China, and this move from OpenAI positions, they have an answer to that a little bit, and then they have an answer to Meta, and they can provide a lot more flexibility for developers and businesses. And on this show, we're going to, because my dear nephew here is a master's in computer science, we're going to be talking a lot about some of the technical pieces around all this stuff in future shows, our favorite AI apps, tools, etc. Where just to kind of give you all a sense of what the reality from the ground is, because these shows are less about giving you the news of the week. You can get that. I mean, this is not a news show. This is rambling about the real meaty things that are going to make a difference for the people building these apps and services. And most of the things in AI have not yet even been conceived, much less built. And then how it's really going to impact millions and billions of people mainstream in applications that we've again barely thought about. Chat GPT is just the beginning. That's why we're so excited to do this show every week for you guys. And so today's news of the week in terms of these two things, both the GPT-5 and open source, and also the economic impact that Wall Street seems to for now love the spending. Those are the two big news of the week discussion points that we wanted to kick off. In terms of our main topic of the week, we wanted to talk about AI coding, which you and I have done a lot of discussions on this on our earlier shows. In fact, we started talking about this stuff, in our second or third show with Sam Altman and so on. And there's an interesting dynamic that's developing here, basically what I call a frenemies environment. The hottest AI startups right now are companies like Anysphere, which makes Cursor, which had one of the biggest ramps of revenue, going to 100 million in revenues in one of the shortest periods of time. And this has been a very hot area. And the Cursor, Windsurf was just bought by Google for the most part. We talked about that on a previous show. And so the hottest area of AI software companies is in AI coding, and they're all leveraging the core language models from OpenAI underneath and from Anthropic and Google's products and others to deliver the services that they do from a coding point of view. And yet, the companies underlying large language models are also building their own coding tools. So there is a frenemies environment that's building up, very similar to NVIDIA, which went from $500 billion market cap about 3 years ago to now over $4 trillion, the most valuable company. Half its revenues are to less than 6 companies that are basically using its chips to deliver all these AI services, yet each one of them is spending billions, each one of them, on the training and inference chips to eventually not buy as many of NVIDIA chips, the frenemy environment. And so that's showing up in AI coding, which is a core area. And I bring it up as a main topic because it affects the fortunes of the big companies, the small companies, the experience for us as mainstream users. And very important, Neal, Mr. Computer Science, this is like the craziest area. It has to be from your point of view. So I'd love to get your
Yeah,
thoughts on this AI
yeah,
coding
and
topic.
the AI coding thing also, it's important to highlight that these as much as these like assistants and agents help to iterate fast and get code out, it's also important to understand the types of platforms that are popping up through this. And obviously we've had a lot of vertical agents where you have your cursors, your windsurfs and whatnot that are good at doing a single task in coding. But recently we covered maybe 2-3 episodes ago that Figma has now fully rolled out their AI assistant to help people design faster. And there is a growing shift towards a more of a horizontal approach where an agent is able to do several tasks well, but also kind of highlights the importance of these agents popping up in a variety of stages throughout in this case, the software development cycle. Because a lot of people, when they think about an agent and coding, they just think about, I need something that can help develop an entire program for me, which was obviously demoed in places like GPT-5 as of late. But it also highlights the need for these agents to be able to do multiple different types of tasks. I mean, even in the OpenAI demo for GPT-5, there was a portion in which they were in Cursor and they were designing a game, and they asked it to create a 3D map of a castle with guards and a fully interactive open world style game. And it just shows the increasing complexity of a lot of these agents, and how an agent just being able to do one thing may not be enough anymore, and that it needs to be more of a multimodal and more of a horizontal approach than just a vertical approach.
No, I think that's a terrific point. The one wrinkle I want to add to on the horizontal versus vertical, because Sam Altman, this question has come up for him a number of times, especially at investor conferences where there are a lot of startup companies and so on. And which areas can you tell us, Sam, that OpenAI is not going to come and steamroll over us? And this horizontal versus vertical thing has come up, and Sam, because he and his team have so much conviction that the large horizontal models are going to get so much better exponentially that there is a very strong view on the OpenAI technology side that the horizontal view ultimately beats the vertical view. That is not to say that the Figmas of the world don't have massive opportunity to create AI coding tools just for their sources, just to help their customers do the kinds of things. So that both can coexist. Two opposite things can happen at the same time, just especially in the early days of this. These are not zero sum games. But I think it's a very important dynamic, and the meat is going to be in the details of these developments, etc. And Figma now, what a spectacular IPO! They are, by the way, that's a separate topic for another show in down the road. Is that the IPO market for technology is now for now open, and unless the broader market cracks for other reasons, tariffs, etc. But Figma is a company that has a lot of opportunity to build all of these AI things. The one thing, and we should talk about it on a future show, Neil, is Figma obviously has captured Wall Street's imagination because, it went from a $20 billion pricing to 50, 60. I think at one point it was over 100 billion and then came back a little bit. But recognize that there's another company, private company called Canva, which is also now primed for an IPO. That is a bigger valuation on the private side than Figma was. And so now that one is potentially an even bigger IPO. And these are companies that are very much in your wheelhouse in the context of tools and so on. So this is a fascinating topic to me, and we can come back to it. But I totally agree on this horizontal vertical dynamic, and both right now have massive opportunities, and it's going to be a fascinating area to watch. So now, why don't we move to our next topic, which is our favorite read of the week, watch of the week, and then we can, when we talk about the obsessions, we can also kind of bring in some of the questions for each other piece as well that we normally now do on the show. So
Exactly.
Neil, you have a very interesting read of the week. I'm excited about this section.
Yeah, it's something that's kind of obviously been on my mind as I've discussed in the last few shows, that I'm currently in the recruiting process, hoping to kind of figure out my next steps post grad, career wise. And it's an article published by the New York Times titled "So Long to Tech's Dream Job," where they're essentially highlighting the growing differences between a lot of these larger, Apples and Googles and Microsofts, and how the environments there are comparing to a lot of the faster growing startups. And I think it's a really good comprehensive piece that not only talks about the overall trends, also they talk to a lot of the employees at these companies who have been on for a while and who have left potentially to join a smaller, faster growing company. But essentially the main idea is that a lot of these once coveted, dream jobs at big tech have now shifted towards kind of a more bureaucratic and potentially fear driven, as they say, almost a shut up and grind type of era, where a lot of these companies have kind of said, hey, this is a moment that if we don't really iterate fast and churn out good product with a sense of urgency, we're going to be left behind. And it kind of highlights a shift away from a lot of the COVID era work, where you'd see a lot of people, hey, we're coding outside by a pool, hanging out with friends. It was a lot more of a laid back approach. A lot of people were not going into offices, obviously for safety reasons, and it highlights a lot of this trend that shifted, where people are being called back into office not only to do work but to do a lot more work. Almost like an 80-hour work week. I've spoken with a lot of friends of mine that have recently graduated and entered the workforce, and it's something that obviously comes up a lot, which is this whole idea of a work-life balance. And there's an article that recently covered Cognition, who bought Windsurf. They sent out a company-wide email essentially saying, hey, there's not, you're not here to have a work-life balance. You're here to get something done and get it done right. Where they're essentially shifting to, a 6 day work week, with the seventh day being on call. So it's almost these 7 day work weeks that are changing the way a lot of people think about, what company would I want to join? Would I want to join a smaller company, bigger company? What are the perks or the work life balance, as a lot of people like to highlight? But I think it's a really good post that just kind of, the main takeaway being that big tech has kind of matured into these bureaucracies with a lot less tolerance for dissent and a lot more emphasis on efficiency and actually getting good product out fast. And I think things like Gen AI magnify a lot of the uncertainty around this, and potentially will cause people to exit towards joining a startup or stay at a larger firm.
I think it's a terrific article, and I'm glad you brought it up as the read of the week. I think it is obviously framed as a big think piece on, oh my God, the current generation has entirely different challenges than previous ones in terms of job opportunities, security, because of this big tech wave. Woe is us. It's going to impact white collar jobs. Dario Amadai from Anthropic, it's putting up yellow flags on that. The reality is, look, this is your generation is far, far better place than my generation was even 20, 30 years ago when I was getting started on this thing. And in your 20s, I'm sorry, yeah, I was born and bred in the Goldman Sachs culture, 7 days a week. I mean, it doesn't matter, we in our 20s when I started at 22, my God, yeah, we worked 7 days a week, 36 hours a day. Not because they wanted us to, we wanted to. We were thrilled to do it. The world was an exciting place. It was the 80s. Everything was growing, exploding, new opportunities, new possibilities, new dangers, new risks. When I look at the world today in 2025, for your generation, it's that times 10. And you don't have to be in technology. So if you want to be excited about it and work in that pace, you absolutely have the opportunity and thrives. And typically in any population of 100 people, 5% will choose to do the more aggressive lean in aspect. The point I'm making is that the opportunity, the tools, the flexibility to go online, have audience, make brands for young people has never been bigger. So that 5% can be 10, 15%. But that doesn't mean that the rest, the regular people of that cohort, have to work the same pace. No, they have the same opportunity. The world is a big place. Jobs are a big place. They're going to have ample opportunities to do the 9 to 5 or 10 to 4 if they want, or 3 days a week. I mean, there have been lots of options. The economy in general is going to grow because of these opportunities, is my personal, humble person view. And so that's one way I would frame this article. The other thing I'll just mention, because all of this has been positioned as a competition with China, AI race with China. Who's winning? Washington. Every time I'm talking to people in Washington, that's what they know. We got to beat China. Guys, China, they actually have institutionalized this. They don't think 9-5. Their numbers are 996. Their culture, and it doesn't have to be in technology, which is what we're talking about. And across almost every industry in China, their people work by volition much harder because they're excited about it. That doesn't mean other people are lazier, etc. These are life choices, and the world is a big place. Countries are big places. There are a lot of opportunities, and over time, with the right hard work and leaning in, I think everyone can find the thing that makes them happy for the right balance.
Exactly.
So I think life work balance is a personal bottom up decision, not as much a top down. And every company gives you the opportunity to go crazy. There was a term that's come up, if people want to Google this, called wild geese, IBM, etc. In the old days when IBM controlled the whole tech, they encouraged young people within their workforces that wanted to do crazy things and gave them the ability to do that. Google had its own version of that, the 20% time where you could work on your own projects. And I know many of the people who did some of that stuff, and the places where they worked 20% of the time of that they were allowed to under Google, they created the core products that ended up basically redefining Google. Gmail, anybody, as an example. So tons of opportunity. I couldn't be more excited for your generation, Neal. This is why one of the reasons we do this fun show, because I want to make sure we talk about it because it's so interesting. My generation never had any of these crazy possibilities. And so I just want to put a very exciting framing on this, which sometimes gets lost in these types of articles, which is always the glass is half empty. And I'm saying the glass is overflowing. Thank you for the great read of the week.
Of course.
My read of the week is I did a post last Sunday about the phrase AI bubble is coming up to the fore again, because valuations on the private side, especially, and the public side with Figma's IPO and other things, is there an AI bubble coming, etc. And it's always a good question. On this show we talk about the technology piece and the financial piece, and because I had a front row professional seat in terms of the so-called .com bubble, the internet phase, etc. There was a book that I'd read a long time ago. I went and reread it. It's called the Dot Com. We'll have it in the show notes. And it was written by a New Yorker author, and it was a good book. We will also have a review of the book if you don't want to read the whole book or synopsis. But it basically reminds us that in the 90s, how the internet bubble kind of evolved what were the bottom up dynamics, etc. And it's interesting to read that, even if you just quickly go through the chapters and so on. And then you'll find both similarities to the current environment and differences. And it just freshens your mind in terms of what to look for from a measurability point of view, both quantitatively and qualitatively, more important. And I did a post on this last Sunday. And my view is that, yeah, there are some bubbly elements, but we're nowhere close to the kind of scenario we saw back in the 90s. The one thing I'll say, in the 90s, there were individual investors who, in the public markets, ultimately got hurt a lot when the markets came down 89%. This time, if it happens, it's less investors directly, it's investors indirectly, because it's the Mag 7s who are investing hundreds of billions, basically all their cash flow, phenomenal cash flow of Meta, Google, over 100 billion a year. They're spending it all on NVIDIA's chips and data centers. And if there is a crash like we had in the internet arena, it was the telecom companies who were down 90%. And that is a danger for the Mag 7s, that their stocks could get hurt a little bit. But, they will work through that. So there is a compare and contrast thing to be done, which is why I went back to the .com book. So that's my read of the week. Why don't we move to our obsession of the week? Neal, you had a little bit of a fun break in the mountains of Colorado, and with the family, with their 50 or 60 extended family members, and you hung out with a lot of your cousins,
Yes.
with different age spectrums and so on. So tell us, as you had an obsession of the week from that
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously nice to see everyone. It's some of my cousins that I haven't seen in a while, and extended families, so cousins of cousins and whatnot. And it ranged, of a wide variety, as young as like 5 to my age of 23. And it was one thing that I kind of focused on was just trying to observe ambiently how people were using AI and how much it came up in conversation. And it was even an example, like one of my younger cousins is around 12 or 13, I believe. We were all hanging out, and he likes puzzles and math and whatnot. He was actually on his computer on Replit of all things, creating a math app from scratch, where he was able to practice a lot of the math that he was learning in school. And it was surprising to me, not only because this kid's taking a passion for coding, but he's also using a lot of these low code and fast paced tools where he's able to just essentially vibe code an entire app to
Ducklings to
help him.
water. I love it. Ducklings to
Exactly.
water.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's examples like that. I have other examples of some cousins who are a bit older, who are now trying to recruit for jobs and whatnot, and they didn't have a professional headshot that they were able to use on LinkedIn, so they were using a lot of the OpenAI tools to provide images of themselves in a casual setting and generate a professional headshot for them to kind of use for LinkedIn or for a resume and whatnot. I had another cousin who was preparing for an interview for an internship, and they were using ChatGPT to kind of prepare for potential questions that they might be asked. These are all things that I wasn't able to do throughout undergrad because these tools did not exist. But it's great to see how people are leveraging these things in common and uncommon ways to kind of get the best use out of it for themselves. So it was great. It was fascinating to kind of see the different use cases.
That is awesome. And you managed to have work-life balance in terms of have fun with this great trip with the hiking and water sports, etc. But you also managed to have some great results in uh, the other obsession, which is your new Substack blog, which, by the way,
Yeah.
everyone, please subscribe. We'll have the links in the show. But you had a great piece,
Yeah,
which I'd love for you to talk about.
it's a piece that I kind of brought up through my question last week, which has to do with privacy and how a lot of people's relationship with privacy in this growing age of AI has changed and shifted over time. And it brings up a lot of different platforms that have existed and are continuing to pop up. I've brought up a couple times my overall obsession for the last couple of months has been AI browsers, and with companies like Perplexity, who recently launched Comet. One thing that I brought up a couple times on the podcast that I also bring up in the post is that whenever you sign up for a lot of these tools, it essentially asks you to relinquish your entire Google account and all the permissions to get actual functionality out of these platforms. So the ability to read your email and your calendar and schedule things. A lot of this inherent benefit is not possible unless you kind of give full access. It's a post that kind of discusses from a Gen Z perspective how we view our relationship with a lot of these tools throughout things like TikTok, where it's no secret that TikTok is collecting, vast amounts of data, but it's a trade off that many people are willing to do just because of the inherent benefit that the algorithm that TikTok has made is so well curated towards an addiction that a lot of people are willing to forego a lot of the privacy concerns in order to just get a couple minutes of fun every day and learn things and view things and have a good laugh. And it even gets into topics like Cluely, which has obviously been a viral startup out of the Bay Area, guerrilla marketing techniques and virality
Don't
through.
like Cluely. I'm going to go on the record, and we can talk about it if we don't like their approach.
Exactly. So it is a very abrasive approach to some, and it's an approach that's garnered a lot of attention from people my age. But the reason I bring it up in the post is because their platform is fully based on having full access and control over your screen, which is a case of a lot of people potentially not wanting to do that, not only because the image that the company has garnered over time is one of cheating and one of kind of getting things done potentially the wrong way in a lot of people's eyes, but it shows this trade-off to where how far are we willing to push the line in terms of privacy and a lot of these models having full access to what we do every day. And anyways, yeah, I'd encourage anyone who's interested in to
I
go
think it's a very
check it
well
out.
thoughtful piece. So everyone, please read it. I think it's short, sweet, pithy, and very well done. So totally agree. In the context of the privacy issue, look, 30 years of technology has shown us that when it comes to free stuff versus paying for things, people have shown us in the billions that they're okay being the product, which means advertising, marketing, etc. So we have to assume that everything we do on these services is going to be monetized and used by companies, whether they have their permission or not. Laws typically come and go, regulations, sometimes they're ahead, sometimes they're back. But this is a perennial challenge. And so as users, we all have to make our own personal decisions. I still refuse apps when they ask to connect to my contacts, etc. But they want to do it because guess what? Friendly and friend graphs were the big thing for social media for the last 25 years. And we got used to giving all the access. And we're going to have to do the same thing here. Next week's show, I'm going to be talking a lot about voice devices. Alexa Plus has just released a series supposed to also now get AI capabilities, Gemini's, that ChatGPT. All of these services are listening all day long. I still, when I use my ChatGPT or my Perplexity, I literally go out of my way every single time to close the app, because otherwise the dang thing is always listening. And there's a trust issue, and every person has to make their own decision on how they use it. And it's a battle I think we've generally on privacy have already lost. But we've lost it for hopefully a lot bigger gains, because the functionality we're going to get out of these systems, knowing our ambient environment, hopefully is going to give us products and services and capabilities that we never had before, that we didn't know we could miss because we don't know what that is, and we will miss it once we get used to it. So that's the exciting part of technology, but it's a great topic and very well done. So I would highlight that. My obsession of the week is I had a piece yesterday, my Sunday post for today. It was basically this trend of humanizing AI. When you listen to Sam Altman talk about GPT-5, and everyone talks about thinking and reasoning and agents and models, basically like a living thing. We are going way overboard. It's one of my pet peeve issues, anthropomorphizing AI. I've had many posts on this. This was another entreaty to say we individually should be aware that this stuff, AI, in a different universe, the AI was not called artificial intelligence. In a different universe, I like to think it was called algorithmic information technology. Basically, these are algorithms. Until 3-4 years ago, until 2017, we did the algorithms in a deterministic way, rules based, etc., which is why Alexa and all these things could tell us the time zones and so on. Today, these systems are all changing to stochastic, which is a fancy word for statistical, which means it's probabilistic, which means half the time, not half the time, about 20-30% of the time, these things are wrong. We even use an English word called hallucinate to discuss a technical term. Hallucinate gives it a human quality, which I disagree with. If they're not hallucinating, they're not conscious, that they're making mistakes because they're delivering the results using statistical methods based on everything that it knows about. It doesn't know anything. It's just indexed the entire internet constantly. Doesn't know anything. So we need to be careful with our words, language. I am a lifetime student of language. It just once you start to see this way, you can't unsee it. And so this has been my obsession. It will continue to be an obsession. This week, I went down the rabbit hole on this one. So I did more work than usual on my Sunday piece. So please, I'm plugging it. Read that to get a better sense of what's been on my obsessive mind on this topic. So hope this kind of was an interesting show. It kind of caps us off for this week. I want to again thank you all. As usual, please comments, suggestions, feedback, like and subscribe, of course. And we're excited to have you along on this rambling journey with us. So please stay tuned.
Thanks. See you next time.